Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. Busy week last week and some updates on what's going on this week from our legislative staff, Deena Bosworth, Director of Government Affairs, Madeline, Fata, Samantha, Gibson, Government Affairs Associates, handling various issues. But with everything that happened last week, let's get right into it. Deena, a lot of our priorities were up in committee last week. Revenue sharing trust fund, some veteran property tax exemption bills were up, some child care fund movements, some updates to some renewable energy initiatives that the governor's put forth, how that impacts solar siting. So a whole bunch of things. Why don't you start off with the revenue sharing trust fund? Obviously a big one for us. What happened last week?
Yeah, last week was a crazy week. I think we had 3 or 4 different committees right at the same time, all with, some of our really big priority issues. Starting it off was clearly the revenue sharing trust fund. That's something that MAC has been working on for years, working on it with other local government partners. And luckily for us, they passed it out of committee. It was great work. We had testified on it actually earlier this year before their summer break. So those are, for everyone wants to know, House Bills 4274 and 4275. They take a carve out of the state sales tax and put it into a revenue sharing trust fund. Best part about that for all of us, again, just to reiterate it, is that as a percentage of the state sales tax, that gives us the security of knowing that we're going to have dedicated funds for revenue sharing and that there's an opportunity for growth. So good news is passed out of committee unanimously. House Republicans and House Democrats all voted for the bill and sent it to the House floor. Super excited about that.
Yeah, that's great news. So now we wait for movement on the House floor. There's, they have some spotty session the next couple of weeks, but do feel pretty good about getting it through over to the Senate in relative quick fashion, don't we?
Yep. No, and also just to kind of throw it out there and remind everyone that we have great Senate sponsors on the same issue. So our former board president, Veronica Kleinfeld, has bills. Senator Jeremy Moss has bills. Representative Mike Weber out of Oakland County. They all have very, very, very similar bills. So we've got bipartisan support on the Senate side too.
Yeah, it's great news. Along the same lines, during that committee, both in that committee and going on a separate committee, there were a bunch of veteran property tax exemption bills, some bills that would help fix the issue that we've been trying to get fixed for a while, and then also dealing with an expansion of the existing legislation. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so for many sessions now, actually, since it went into effect in 2014, we've been working on trying to get the state to reimburse locals for their losses associated with this veterans property tax exemption. And we've come up with a mechanism to do it, and that is through a refundable income tax credit, and that for the veteran, in the amount of their property taxes, which is either payable to the veteran if they've already paid them or payable to the local unit of government. And, it's great because you've got legislators who are talking about how this veterans property tax exemption is really an unfunded mandate on local units of government, which is great. So they recognize that there's a problem. The veterans organizations recognize that there's a problem, that this is just millions and millions of dollars across the state that is not going into local budgets. So we had a hearing on that in House local government, but in the military and veterans affairs, there were other bills that deal with what happens when 100% disabled veteran dies and what those spousal benefits really look like. Do they continue on? What if they sell their house? What do we do? And although MAC is not opposed to any kind of expansion, so long as the reimbursement mechanism is there. So we're still kind of trying to figure out how we rectify these 2 different approaches to veterans property tax exemption in committee. The expansion, again, keeps it as a property tax exemption. That doesn't really work in the law when we're trying to make it a refundable income tax credit. So stay tuned on that. I do expect a lot more movement yet this fall on the issue. Not sure if we'll get quite across the finish line though.
Where are the veteran groups on the issues?
So the veterans groups are very, very hesitant to take a solid position for or against. They want to fix the funding mechanism for us. The veterans groups want locals to be able to be reimbursed. And they would like to tackle that, and tackle, sort of what happens to the surviving spouse. But they're not willing to support either one. They weren't willing to support them last week just because we got to get this figured out first, and they want to see it all taken care of.
Yeah,
So
do you
they're there with us, arm in arm for sure, but not quite ready to just sign off on everything.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, they even said it in their testimony. They want the locals to be reimbursed for these. So there, which is how do we get there? So everyone keeps everyone happy, right?
Yep. One other thing I forgot to mention, another priority of ours that was up in committee this week, that was in-house tax policy. That's the personal property tax reimbursement stuff. So there's $75 million sitting out there for local units of government to get reimbursed for the small business personal property tax expansion that went into effect last year. Well, they're getting the exemption this year. The money's set aside for us. We just have to get the policy done. Luckily, that got voted out of House tax policy too. So we're on our way to getting that fixed.
Yeah, good news on that. That's, yeah, like you said, 75 million there. The veterans property tax kind of started at 25 million. Now that's ballooned up to, a very large
100.
number. Yeah, 100 million statewide for all locals. So some significant dollars we're working to get back into locals' pockets. All right, Madeline. So the governor's renewable energy standards, so there was an update to that last week. We're still working on this solar siting issue and who's going to do that. Can you give us a little update on that, please?
Sure. So last week in Senate Energy, there were some amendments to the clean energy bills that would essentially push back the date for that 100% renewable energy goal that the governor set out. So what it was in Senate Bill 271, initially Michigan was supposed to be 60% renewable between the years of 2030 and 2034 and 100% renewable by 2035. But so they've pushed that back just a little bit, and it will now be 60% renewable by 2032, 100% by 2040. So all of that is to say the governor has, I think they're still very ambitious renewable energy goals. We anticipate that solar and wind efforts will expand greatly in the next 17 years here. So by 2040, 100% renewable. So there's still discussion about putting all of the regulating authority for solar and wind energy into the hands of the Public Service Commission. Now, we had a big work group last week. We're trying to preserve some type of local control if that's what they want to do. We're continuing those conversations. We expect that legislation will formally be introduced this week. Yeah, it's a crazy time.
Yeah, so it's obviously something we're opposed to any time we're eroding local control like that, preempting local control. So I know we're working hard to kind of maybe find a fix there where the local voice is preserved, but we'll also see when that legislation is introduced to see exactly how that looks. And as far as giving it all to PSC, that's kind of unprecedented, right? They don't really do anything like this now, correct?
It is. As far as all other energy sources, all those facilities have to adhere to local zoning ordinances. So the proposal that we've seen goes above and beyond any other regulation of any other energy source.
Yeah. Well, good. We'll keep everyone updated as that legislation is introduced and what it exactly says and how we're going to try to fix that. Sam, how about giving us an update on some of the juvenile justice issues that are up? There's a joint committee, I believe, last week. We're going to have another joint committee this week looking at the issue. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in that area.
So last Tuesday, House Criminal Justice and Senate Judiciary held a joint meeting, as you said, Steve, They took testimony on the child care fund reimbursement increase. That's House Bill 4624 and Senate Bill 418. There were so many people that are testifying in support that they did not have time to get to my testimony. So hoping that will take place at the next hearing, which is Tuesday at 9 a.m. Same joint layout there. So we'll also hear testimony on House Bill 4630 and Senate Bill 424, which are the MIDC expansion bills that includes youth indigent defense. We did initially have concerns and opposition to these bills, but thankfully we were able to work that out. And our support for 4630 is contingent on a few things. First and foremost is the removal of the compounding clause. When the bill was introduced, there was a compounding clause to the local share. We were able to negotiate that language out of the bill. There's no local share increase whatsoever. And then the other piece that we were opposed to was the disbursement model that they were looking to maybe switch to, or I'm sorry, distribution. We're originally at a disbursement. We will stay a disbursement model, but that distribution will change. So we'll see 40% of the grant distributed upfront versus the 25 on a quarterly basis. And that will be in the bill tomorrow morning as well. And I'll testify in support of that. I think with that package, we're looking by the end of the month, it should be on the House floor. So moving steadily.
Yeah, good news on getting that that compounding taken out. That would have been obviously costly to counties. And then also, Deena, last week there was you provided testimony on the public safety trust fund bills, which kind of do a lot to increase funding for public safety. However, the way the bills are introduced at this point, it does kind of ignore our sheriff's department, jails, our public safety areas, right?
Yeah, so this is another one of those proposals that's really coming out of the city of Detroit. So Mayor Duggan has a couple of big ideas going on. One is land value tax, and that was up in committee this week. That's sort of a split rate tax that he wants to use to tackle blight. But the other is this idea of the Public Safety Trust Fund, very much modeled after our revenue sharing trust fund. But he wants to have more money go to public safety and violence prevention. So the bills would carve out a percentage of the state sales tax, put it in the fund, and then distribute money out of that fund to those cities, villages, townships that experience violent crime. And the distribution is kind of capped at 25% of the total pot per municipality. And it would be, really based on your percentage of violent crime as a percentage or compared to the entire state. Well, the way the bill reads is that the money goes to those municipalities for violence prevention, public safety. And if those municipalities contract with a sheriff's department, then that money can pass through to the sheriff. Well, you and I both know, Steve, we've been looking at this for quite a while and really trying to get a good picture of it, but not all of our local units actually contract with their municipalities, but they still provide significant services. So whether it's detective services, Marine Patrol, dogs, drug teams, forensics, whatever it might be, those are expensive resources that we have, but we aid the locals in a lot of that crime prevention or investigation. Not to mention the fact that if we're going to take a huge effort and crack down on violent crime, where are those people going? They're going to the county jail. They're going to be there for a while. Maybe they go to prison. Maybe they don't. Maybe we end up housing them there. But those are still resources that our counties can use to assist the locals in that and tackling violent crime. So we tried to put an amendment on the bill that would carve out a portion of the money that goes out, carve part of that out to go to our sheriff's offices to help with their law enforcement efforts and the assistance they give the municipalities. We were unsuccessful in getting the amendment adopted, but the conversation is continuing. We have the word of the chair of the committee and some of our huge champions that are in the House that either have been in law enforcement or were former county commissioners. So that will continue to be a conversation as the bill moves through the process.
Yeah, a few of those folks were pretty vocal in committee in supporting that amendment as well. So that's good news that we can possibly see some changes there to expand those dollars to go to the jail operations or sheriff's department. So always good to have those former county commissioners speaking on our behalf that are now legislators, right?
Love you, Julie, if you're listening.
Yeah. Well, great. Did I miss anything on our list? We had a busy week last week. I want to make sure I didn't miss any other topics. No?
I think that was a lot last week.
It was. Well, and then briefly, we're still hearing about an early adjournment, correct? To the legislature, possibly a mid-November, if not sooner, adjournment for the session. That's still kind of what's being talked about around town. I guess we'll just wait and see on that, and as we get closer to that date, huh?
Steve, let me pipe in. There was one other thing, and Sam, you can cover it. I don't think we necessarily did, but there's some labor issues. So everything so far has been pretty good. And we talked about today, pretty good for counties. Couple labor issues sitting out there that really could increase, some of the costs or at least some of the angst at the bargaining table. Minimum staffing and expanding binding arbitration to county corrections officers. But Sam, they didn't vote that bill out, the binding arbitration, correct?
They did not vote out the mandatory staffing bill. I'm not
Okay.
too sure on binding arbitration. I want to say that's in Senate committee. And the mandatory staffing is still in House labor. Madeline, I don't know if you know where binding
Yeah.
arbitration is.
The binding arbitration legislation is it was in Senate labor last week. Testimony only, wasn't voted out.
Yeah. So they're still hanging out there, and we still are, really working on how to mitigate the financial impact that those two, especially combined, could have for our counties. So still working on that.
Yeah, so still a lot of things we're keeping our eye on here as we move through this session with a possible early adjournment. It'll certainly be a busy last few weeks, I'm sure, of October. Once we get back from our conference, which is the first, through the 3rd down in Kalamazoo, we'll get back from that, and I'm sure it'll be full steam ahead then those last few weeks in October, huh?
Yes, a lot. And we're used to that. We're used to that pace sort of in the legislature when you get into like December of every year. But just this year with the potential for adjourning early, it just accelerates everything into really October. So
Yeah, it moves everything up. All right. Well, great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the update. Have a good week, and we will talk to you next week. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.